Longtime fans of my work should not be surprised to know that I am a prophet, a green seer, if you will, a psychic, appointed perhaps by the heavens, who knows. I am, of course, the one who joked that Capcom was due an announcement of a remake of Resident Evil for the new systems, and, well, just a few days after my joke, Capcom announced they were remastering the remake of Resident Evil for PS4, Xbox One and PCs. So that's something I predicted. I also predicted that EA would start charging for demos, which they announced shortly after that prediction, I think within 20 minutes. And of course, most famously, I accurately predicted that Agatha the Bug Princess would be playable in Hyrule Warriors. I am a prophet, but I don't get to make the predictions, I don't get to choose, rather, the predictions that come true. So when I accurately predicted that EA would shut down Maxis, well, I mean, it's not my fault, but I did call it. 200 days, almost a year in advance of the announcement, I might add. So, you know, if anything is to be taken away from the closure of Maxis, it's that I am a genius. I'm a genius. I'm being somewhat facetious vis-a-vis the prediction thing, of course, because in all honesty, while I will totally add this prediction to my list, it's not as if the writing wasn't on the wall for anybody who could pass the text. A casual knowledge of Electronic Arts' behaviour would let you see just how clear Maxis' shuttering was, and it's become quite evident that despite previously grandstanding a regret at its own consumption of studios, EA has never stopped being the industry's own version of Unicron, moving from developer to developer, swallowing them whole, stripping them bare, and leaving no evidence of their being. The key to seeing Maxis' shuttering was the 2013 release of SimCity, a notoriously controversial entry in the series. The game was saddled with an unnecessary and unwanted permanent online connection, a form of jumped-up DRM that Maxis and EA insisted was integral to the experience, even though all it really ever did was render the game unplayable at launch for a ton of people due to servers that couldn't handle it. Of course, it was clear at the time we were being bullshitted when the necessity of this online feature was stressed, a fact compounded by Maxis later revealing it was exploring putting an offline mode in. Further controversies included restrictions on city size, SimCity fucking over mods, and a general slew of bugs that stuck to the game's reputation like flies on shit. The Sims 4, while handled by a different studio, is still heavily associated with Maxis, the Sims studio as it's known being listed as a Maxis subsidiary, so when that game featured many of the same problems as SimCity, it was Maxis' name that got dragged through the mud. Yet again, shitty ideas that seemed corporate mandated, limitations on content, a reduced scale and sterile presentation were married to a bunch of bugs in a cynical shell of a game. Two big games, tied to Maxis, surrounded by critical press, disappointment from fans, and general negativity. Then Maxis shuts down. This is the EA way, and it's becoming less and less subtle about it. You buy a studio, you let them do their thing for a bit, and then you start making them fall in line, introducing typically more and more EA-style ideas into their whole way of doing things. Online features get more and more attention, regardless of whether or not they're by popular demand. Content becomes sterilized and shrunk down, the overall product quality diminishes, and the developer is often saddled with the burden of justifying it all, becoming complicit in the bullshit, while EA, the corrupter itself, sits behind the curtain quietly. Eventually, the studio itself becomes inextricably linked to bad games and negative press, and EA jettisons the whole thing to save its own face. Before Maxis, it was Mythic. Mythic had been going since 1990, creating a number of online games such as Dark Age of Camelot. After its purchase by EA, the company was restructured a few times, becoming EA Mythic, then BioWare Mythic, then back to Mythic Entertainment. It tried valiantly to make EA's Warhammer Online a lasting thing, making a pretty well-received MMO, but this 23-year-long career came screeching to a halt when EA decided, in all its wisdom, to put Mythic onto the legendarily fuck-awful microtransaction vehicle Dungeon Keeper Mobile. We don't need to go into the details of that little pile of shit, but needless to say it was the prelude to another shuttering, a hateful little game that Mythic had to stand by, tying it forever to a product couched in cynicism and contempt for the audience. Mythic Entertainment was closed in 2014, not long after DK Mobile. And before Mythic, it was Danger Close, formerly EA Los Angeles, formerly DreamWorks Interactive LLC. Since the 90s, this team worked on games like The Neverhood, Skull Monkeys, Medal of Honor of course, and a number of Command & Conquers, but like EA's previously mentioned victims, the studio met an ignoble end, closing its career with two underwhelming Medal of Honor reboot games that seemed to exist solely to satisfy EA's hate boner for Call of Duty. Medal of Honor Warfighter, its last game, was particularly sad, a thoroughly mediocre shooter, once again lacking in content and bursting with cynicism. It was both a critical and commercial failure, and that's the hill DreamWorks Interactive died on. Because what EA wants, EA gets, and when what it wants pisses off critics and consumers alike and results in egg on people's faces, it's not EA that'll pay for the damage. It'll be the studio that undermined its reputation to abide by corporate desires, defended the shitty business practices, and was rewarded for loyally marching in lockstep by being marched to the slaughterhouse. These are just recent victims of a particular pattern of EA's. The publisher has, of course, many other famous kills under its belt. Bullfrog, Pandemic, Westward, Origin, to name a few. A lot of these acquisitions and closures had some similar patterns too, especially Westward, which underperformed with games like C&C Renegade. Many people have suggested that BioWare could be next on the chopping block. In fact, many people have been dreading that eventuality for years. Looking at EA's recent pattern, however, I think BioWare is safe. For now. Despite the controversy surrounding Mass Effect 3, the studio is still producing critical and commercial hits that fans generally love, and have gotten away with balancing EA's need for homogeny, DLC and content reduction with quality experiences. Until we see a BioWare game that fully betrays itself with something like, I don't know, forced mandatory MMO elements or a sudden 6-hour-long campaign, I think BioWare's alright. It'll be fine as long as it can keep the EA stink off its games, which so far it's managed more or less successfully. No, you want to know what studio I worry for? Visceral. And if I were a betting man, that's what I'd put money on closing. It's got the hallmarks already. Its Dead Space series was awesome until EA started EAing it up, with Dead Space 3 restructured to be a hive of microtransactions and DLC, and the studio has now been moved on to Battlefield Hardline, a first-person shooter that seems at great risk of critically and commercially flopping if the lukewarm reactions thus far are anything to go by. With Dead Space not being the cross-medium smash hit EA weirdly expected it to be, Visceral is looking like a classic studio with which its owner knows not what to do, and I worry that if Hardline turns out to be another contemptuous release that's more product than game, it'll be Visceral's neck. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I like Visceral a lot. But if Visceral's not here in the next few years, I can't say I'll be surprised. One thing, however, seems certainly certain. Electronic Arts will close another studio. If not Visceral, then one of the other developers it's swallowed up in its gaping maw like so much plankton in a whale's undiscerning mouth. It's at the point where if you run a company and have any respect for that company's history, legacy, and the people it employs, the last thing you should want to do is entertain an offer from the boys in Redwood City. Not unless you like the idea of being picked up by your head, bitten into, drained dry, and then tossed onto the growing pile of shriveled, desiccated husks. And EA's executives will later say it regrets it, that it's sad about closing the studio before finding more of them to buy, to drain and to kill. Because EA's like a big vampire, like a Galactus vampire, or a Tyrannid hive fleet, or indeed Unicron. And also it smells of poo. No, you are not being replaced by a sock. I told you I just went for dinner with the guy. I'm not going to replace you. You're the best sidekick a game industry pundit could ever have. I'm sorry about this. Miniature fantasy Willem Dafoe is having self-esteem issues again, and I'm going to go have to take care of this. So thank God for me, and yes, thank God for miniature fantasy Willem Dafoe, because he's never going to let me hear the end of it.